Alright, if you got a 218 new process transfer case out of a Hummer, ooh, getting blurry there. This is what we're doing here is we're putting a 700 R4 in this Hummer, and I actually already opened it up, speed up process to show you. But what you gotta do is you gotta change the yoke on the input. So I'll show you how to tear one of these down. They're a little unique and slap back together if you're doing the same thing. If you got to rebuild one, it's pretty much the same process. You'll just have to put in new parts. So first, obviously, just impact that off. There's going to be a little seal in there. So take your yoke off. There's your seal. If you're rebuilding it, you'll replace it. Then you'll take off these bolts here. This will be just Permatext. So cold chisel and drive her off. And there'll be some shims here. Don't lose those. This one's got 2 shims. Always set everything in the reverse, so that way when you go to assemble it, it makes your life easier. This is just your speedo gear here. Slide that off. Set her in there. Okay, so next you would take off all these bolts here. Right in here you'd have this bracket, which would bolt on there to hold your exhaust up. Just zing all them bolts out. And then this will be Permatext here too. You'll have right there a lug to get your screwdriver in. There'll be another lug on the other side here somewhere, right there. Get your screwdriver in. You get a leverage her up real good. It's already broke her free. Alright, that's what it looks like. Took 2 hands. So you have a spring there, you got a bearing here. This here is kind of more or less a goofy bushing. I mean, it's a speedo drive, but they use it as a bushing in here. Just kind of balance her out. Really does that. It might pull some fluid forward, but it's a really goofy transfer case. It doesn't have an oil pump. As you can see, it's got holes to lubricate the bearings for the sling factor, and it's got holes in the shaft, is almost as if they thought they were going to pressure feed it with an oil pump like they do most transfer cases, but this one does not have that. This one, the bearings are good. It looks as if they'd put a thrust washer here, but they do not, so don't worry yourself. This gear here just rides against there. You would think that wouldn't be good, but that's how they run it. This one here I got to emery up a little bit. You can see we got a little bit of rust that built up. Of course, this Hummer sat for who knows how long. But okay, so next step. On this one, there are needle bearings in here. Some bigger ones, can't remember the number. You're going to watch really carefully as you pull it up. Now, I trans-gelled these in, so hopefully they stay put for just can I show you? Okay, yeah. So I used, so you can see they got an O-ring there, sits up in there, in that pilot. So you take this bad Betty, other side, so you see you got an O-ring, you got these larger needles. Now, since I took this apart already, I trans-gelled them in so they stay placed. When you slide that off, these are going to go everywhere. I mean, if you're lucky, you can kind of cup your hand and catch them down here, but these will go everywhere. Luckily, they're large enough. I would suggest, honestly, rather than doing a bench like this, do it on a cart where you can capture everything. But so, I'm going to take these off, set them aside. Alright, just peeled them off here. you see, just lay them out. You will have 15 of them. So, in case you happen to lose them, mic them out. Well, not mic them, but caliper will be fine. Measure them out. You'll be able to find them individually. I don't know the part number for those, but the next ones I'll show you in case you need the part number for them ones. So, don't need to take that O-ring off unless you're going to replace it. This just works right on up. Nice and easy. Now, it goes like that. Down. Now, you see this little spacer ring in here. This ring here just holds another assortment of needles in. There's 2 layers. There's a layer of needles here, a spacer, and a layer of needles down here. So these little guys are gonna go everywhere. They're only lubed with training fluid, and that's not very sticky. So as soon as you start to slide this up, you're SOL. So like I said, really do this on a cart like that, or on a bench that's much cleaner and doesn't have cracks like mine, or you're going to be very upset unless you carry spare needles like I do. Alright, I slid up. Like I said, I trans-gelled all these needles in, so that way I could actually show somebody pretty fast. But so you can see the needles just sit in there. This slides up, and normally these are going to drop and fall straight down as you go. The only thing that'll be left is with these spacer rings. You're probably going to swear a lot, be real upset. You're going to be fishing a boatload of needles down there. You'll think you'll catch them all. A good chunk are going to plop over and you're going to lose them. So, said, contain space. Clean space. If you're really good, you'd lay like a nice white piece of paper down or something so that way you could actually see. But they're going to go everywhere. Be prepared. Don't get frustrated, just be prepared. So you slide that hub up, then next, you'll take these bearings off. Your spacer, a bearing. Your other spacer will usually still be stuck there. You just kind of set that where it goes. And then you got this snap ring, which would be right here. You're going to take that out. Help lift this gear off. And so now you will just lift straight up both gears. I mean, it's pretty, they lift pretty decent. Nothing about them. You'll see them off here in just a second. Alright, I just picked it off as a unit. Takes both hands. Like I said, you can still see how all these bearings are here. There's a ledge there to hold the needles up. Then you got spacer, needles, spacer. Nice little thrust washer here. Pick her right up. So you got this gear on top. You got this collar when the selector hub comes up to lock 4-wheel drive. It sits underneath of it on this shaft. So it'll be the collar and then the gear for the chain. So then next what you would do here is, obviously your needles wouldn't be there, but you'd pick up your 2 sleeves, fish as many needles out as you can, and then these cases, the later Hummer cases, have a short loop. It'll kind of go around here and then back to there. All this is your transmission fluid looping through here, trying to take heat out of your transfer case when you're beating the living snot out of her. The early ones here have a full loop, as you can see. Downside of that is when you want to pull this stuff out, you have to pull the loop out. You gotta be very, very careful. The short loops, I know, are really known for cracking. Not so much in the large loops, but you still gotta be careful. They'll crack right here. And then, so what you'll have is, they kind of call it a vampire mode, and your transfer case will be sucking off ATF out of your transmission, and it'll fill this puppy right full. And then you'll start burping it out of the breather, out of the transfer case. So your transmission will keep losing fluid. You won't know where the hell it's going. So what you do, put a wrench on here. Use one of them nice French wrenches, them croissants, and like right there, that I'm using as a spacer to kind of keep our yoke up. But put a wrench on there, and then just put your zinger wrench and zing this nut off. And do the same here. Put a wrench on there so it can't turn, then zing that off. Then you'll have a nut, a washer. This will come straight out. There'll be a rubber washer right under there on either one of those. It'll lift straight up. Just the big deal is you don't want to torque these side to side or they will crack and leak. And you'll be very upset. Alright, in case you're wondering, it's a 3/4 nut. And just grab your crescent wrench and just adjust your little French wrench here to sit on there nice and snug. I'm using a ratchet, but it's much faster. You just use an impact gun. Just zing it off. As long as you hold this steady, you're good to go. Then you'll do the same thing. Slide over this one. I mean, you just want to hold just this steady. So, alright, I'll show you it pulled off in a second. Alright, so here's your nuts. You got kind of these conical shaped spring washers. They'll sit on there like that. Each one of these, you see, maybe not so great. So, and then this cooling loop will loop right off. You gotta use 2 hands on this one, because what I do is I always put a tiny O-ring here that just sits snug over it, and the washer seals it up just in case as a backup that this one fails, because like when you're going into it like I am, you're not rebuilding the whole thing, you don't get new O-rings or O-ring washers there, so it's just a backup. But I'll peel them off quick and lift this off and show you. Alright, I got the little O-rings off, so you just kind of pick your cooling loop up. As you can see, you got these washers with rubber in them. It's a sealer. And you can see you have a tab there, and it'll locate right there, and that'll help keep your cooling loop where it needs to sit. And then your tension spring for your shift fork, you just pull that right off. Then your shift fork assembly can actually come straight up. You'll take the selector hub with it. Just kind of set her down. You'll have little plastic pads on here. Make sure they're not wore out. If they are, replace them. Usually they're pretty fine. When you go to put it back together, put a little dab of trans gel on them, so that way they sit when you put the hub on, so you're not chasing them. Got this nice little thrust washer there. It's just a little brass thrust washer. This one's got a little bit of wear on it. It's not bad. So what you do next here, a little stuck, is you'll pull this rod out that holds your shift forks, and then you'll be able to pull this shift fork out. It sits in a tab on this plate. Just kind of rock her back and forth. You can push to and fro on here, and it'll give you enough wiggle room to get that fork out of the way. Alright, got the rod out. I guess you don't have to pull the rod out first, but I usually do. You just grab this output shaft, pull her straight up. See what she looks like. I just put a little trans gel on the tips of these so that way they don't go in dry. That's up to you. Alright, and then after that hub's out of there, you can kind of grab this by the fork right here. And you're just going to twist and pull straight up. That lug disengages. So you got your planet set up here. Nothing too fancy. See, there's no thrust washers or nothing in there. Then you got a nice little thrust bearing in here. No races, just thrust bearing. Sits down in there. And here's our hub. You have another thrust bearing, then you have a race. You see the race. You see you got 2 stacked roller bearings in there. If you need to replace them, then you would. That's just how you get to it. If for some reason you need to replace this gear, never seen one wear out. But I suppose if you're really four-wheeling, you could. Like I said, I'm just replacing just this hub. I already put the new one in, but I figured hell, I'd make a video of it. So here's what you'd have. Here is your standard hub, Turbo 400. We obviously switched to 700R4. So we got our 700R4 hub out of a different gear case. Little risky because of 2 things. So, when you do the 700R4 in front of a 218 case, you're going to have to get an adapter for the back of your 700R4 and do a little machine work. You can find them for sale. I'm not going to go into it because it's a pain in the ass, and if you're that determined that you're going to do it yourself, you'll be able to figure it out. Otherwise, there's a guy down in Florida. He sells a kit. He sells it with this and trans mount and the hub. Don't listen to this shit. That's communist. But you can get this whole kit. Yeah, had to pause out there. I get sick of the commie banter on the radio these days. But so you can see the differences. Just the shaft size. You can also see that the splines are in deeper on this. So you're going to have less spline engagement. Another thing, on the tail housing of the 400, the splines come flush with the adapter that mates it to the transfer case. When you buy the adapter for the 700R4, it's actually inset also like this. So what you want to do is make sure you don't run a gasket. Do a thin bead of Ultra Gray Permatex or competitor brand, whatever, so you get maximum spline engagement, because you can see how much spline engagement you're losing just on this end, and you're losing spline engagement on the transmission end. So you gotta be careful there. Another thing too, some of these have bearings, like I showed you, others have thrust washers. If you have the bearing, see, this hub here was set up for a thrust washer. If you have the bearing, you need to take this race, which you can see here. It obviously sit all the way over here. I should have showed it before I ground it. But this race sits all the way flush about. Well, that isn't going to work on here with this taper. So you got to do is you got to take this race, patiently take it and spin it at the bench grinder. So you grind that lip from about here all the way up to there, so it sits over here nice and flush. And then, because if you don't do that, otherwise these heights are exactly identical. So if you don't put that race in there for the bearing, your stack up height will be different. You'll have more thrust on this input. You want your stack up to be the exact same as what it was before. So you grind that race from about here up to there, get to sit. What I do is, when I do that, is I take some Loctite, since it's nice and flush, and put a little bead of Loctite on there, press the race down. I take something to hold it tight, let it sit for a good while, make sure that after I'm done the race is snug, because I don't want the race to spin, because it doesn't have much to locate it like it does on here, and it would, most likely it would never move because there's not enough room for it to move, but just as peace of mind, some Loctite to locate it down, and then you'll never have any worries. So now that's what I was after, swapping these hubs. So I'm going to put it back together. If you're rebuilding yours, obviously you're putting new bearings, yada yada. You might not be swapping these hubs. For example, if you're still keeping a Turbo 400, you don't care about maxing out at 50 miles an hour. But if you want to put a 7R4 in, you just swap to one of these hubs. For the life of me, I can't remember which one this is, but if you do enough looking on some new process transfer cases, you'll be able to find this hub. Or like I said, you can find a guy, he sells a whole kit. It's a little more expensive. I can't remember what he charges. It ain't cheap, but You know, toys aren't cheap. Alright, so back to work. Putting her back together. Make sure your race is in there. Put your bearing in there. I'd lube your bearing with some ATF or trans gel. I just lubed this from ATF. Take your input hub. Set it right down in there. It'll sit down nice and flush. Now this bearing here you'll want to locate with a little trans gel because it likes to slide around. Try to center it the best you can. I put a little trans gel on them rollers there, so it's got some pre-lube. I also put a little trans gel on the pilot. This stuff doesn't like dry starts, especially with this transfer case where it does not have an oil pump like most that would lube those bearings. So this thing is heavily relying on splash lubrication, which I don't know why they did, but you know, to each his own. Alright, next you're going to put the fork in. Make sure that these pads are seated like this. They like to float out and drift. There's a little locating lug in the center of this one to help it from drifting. As you can see, a little trans gel in the back of them. They'll stay. If you don't know what I'm talking about, trans gel, this is trans gel. It makes your life amazing. If you don't have it, you can use Vaseline. Not as nice. This stuff's meant to, once it warms up, melt in and go with the transmission fluid and not cause any problems. Do not use grease. Do not, do not, do not. It will not melt and it will not blend with the transmission fluid and it will pool. It just never use grease with anything that transmission fluid goes with. You will regret it. So, and that stuff, you can get it from them crooks over at Napa for like $10. There's green, there's blue. They all have different kind of thicknesses. Green, blue, red. Any of them will do what you need to do. But so make sure that them little tabs are where they need to be. You know, take this bad Betty, lift her up. Like I said, there's no thrust washers on this one. Set her in. Then you're going to want that tab there. You're going to need to locate it in a slot. You can kind of see it down there. In that slot. And you want to get seated all the way with these gears. It'll be a two-hand job. So I'll come back to it. But you'll see you get this end down, that end in, and it kind of rotates in. Alright. Back to it. It's seated. You can see how it's seated right down in there, nice and tight. And then, I can't, but this is in that groove there. It's just kind of a wiggling down and then you twist it into that groove. That's what it looks like when it's fully seated. So next, now what you're going to do, you're going to grab this shaft, and nice and lubed up. It's going to go down in. You want to make sure, might take a couple times, sometimes that bearing likes to move, that's why I like to locate it with trans gel. You want that bearing, you go where it goes, you can see right where the rollers hit, and the pilot to slide down into the hole. So, let's see if we can do it one-handed, sometimes. So, oh, and we got it. That's surprising. Alright, so you can see these splines here, that's for when obviously it's engaging and disengaging the hub, so you want that gap there. That's kosher. So that's all the way seated. We're good to go there. Alright, next we got our rod here. You go down. I like to put it, I mean technically it can be put either way. Got a larger taper here. I like to put the taper up. That's the way it comes. I've seen them both ways. Some people say it's wrong if you go this way. I haven't seen a transfer case fail because someone put it in this way. But it will help you greater to have it that way. So when you slide the tail housing on, it'll guide it on. So you're going to put it in. It'll kind of only go in one way. And you slide through the fork. Then there's going to be a hole down in there. Actually, two holes on this one. You'll kind of see this one, it's the lower hole that it sits into. Alright, so next, this is seated. We're ready to put our fork on. So, like I said, transgel. Make sure that you get all these located where they need to go. You can kind of see the little groove in the middle there, so these sit tight. As far as I've ever known, these hubs are non-directional. Someone could correct me if I'm wrong, but they look identical either way. I've never seen any markings, never read anything. So, just put the fork into there and... Alright, so you see, it's all the way seated, nice in the fork. Use a spring in here, no need to remove that. You don't need to disassemble this assembly in any way. I mean, unless you think you need to clean it, but there's no need, there's no need to clean it. So don't make more work for yourself. You just slide it. Much easier to do with two hands. So this hub will slide down over. Just wiggle it down, and boom. She sits. Wait for this to focus. That don't show worth crap. You can see there's a cam here, and a little ear here, and that ear is what runs this fork up and down to lock your four-wheel drive. So this is your four-wheel drive engagement. Down there's your four-low engagement. So, a little magnet back. So next, you can do this one of two ways. You can put transgel in here. This is a must. Your transgel, Vaseline, something. You gotta do it that way. You can put all your needles in around this shaft. Put your spacer in, the big one. Then the needles and the little spacer. And then you can slide this over. Or you can do it vice versa. And you can put them all in here. Spacer, needles, spacer. And slide it down. Either way, usually one or two needles works their way free, and you do it like 2 or 3 times, unless you really sather her up with transgel, and then she all drops down. What I like to do myself is I will put the needles on here, because when you're setting this down, you have the hub to engage it and the sprocket, and you're lowering it down as a section with this sprocket and the chain. It seems easier with the needles on there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to dope this up, put the needles on, and you'll see in a second here what that looks like. Scratch that. Got ahead of myself. Keep thinking this is the short loop version, this is the long loop. Before we do that, we need to put in our coolant loop. So, grab your coolant loop. If you're rebuilding, put in new O-rings with the washers. If you're not, inspect them. Make sure that they're decent looking. These are decent. If you're really on the edge and worried about it, you could probably put in just a smidge of Permatex. These will be fine. But, you know, you never want to go hog wild with Permatex. Just cause you grief. You see that tab kind of locates her. Sits her nice. Now, a leak insurement that I do, so I take a little O-ring, just out of a generic O-ring assortment. Couldn't tell you the size. I just have a bunch. I slip them over it, and then you have to work it up these threads and tight to the base. And then this conical washer here will cinch tight and hold this teeny little O-ring up in there. And it's just a seal on both sides, basically, is all it is. So it's kind of, you want one that just, it's real thin, just slides up, and then you're going to have to work it over the threads up tight. Alright, so you can see the O-rings up, nice and tight. You get them up there. Then you'll take your conical washers, shaped this way, slide them up, put your nut on. You'll do the same as reverse. You put your wrench on here to hold this. Very, very important. Do not let this twist. This will crack. You'll be sad. In all honesty, you're most likely going to end up getting a short loop. Them are the ones you can find. These long loops are hard to find. Or you're going to do some jerry-rig deal and make your own loop to come through and plug up, or more likely you'll probably end up plugging these holes off and just not having the heat transfer, because these are not easy parts to find, so don't break them. You're going to pay out the ass and be very upset. Just not a good deal. Be super, super careful. Alright. So, snugged up, torque spec, good and tight. Now, if you're rebuilding yours, obviously you're going to take the nut off down here. You're going to take this apart, put a seal in there. You got a washer, a needle bearing, and a washer to space this out. I have no need to do that, but if you do, that's what you do. You take the nut off, this yoke will come off. And you can take the seal out, bearing out, yada yada, blah blah. Rinse, wash, repeat. You get it. So now we're ready to put our needles back in here, put her together. So take your trans gel, just lather her up real good. Never want it to be dry. So just get yourself a nice thick film. And we'll start to put our needles on. Now, here comes the interesting part. If you happen to lose these needles, don't shit your pants. What you can do, you can get these. Now this part number here supersedes to an SKF part number. A couple others. These are needle bearings for a blower. Kind of like ones like on two-stroke Detroits. But you can buy this kit. I mean, you can find these new old stock on like eBay or other places for like 20 bucks. Otherwise, like I said, take this part number. It supersedes to an SKF. You can transfer it over and get what you need. So don't shit your pants if you lose all these needles, or a good chunk of them. Spend 20 bucks, you can get these, rather than spending the $300 and some for a whole needle kit. These ones, they're rather large, a lot harder to lose. If you do lose them, measure them. You can get them. Off the top of my head, I've never lost these ones. I have lost these ones time to time. I can't remember what these cross-reference to, but if you measure length and diameter, you will come up with something. Don't worry. Don't buy a whole bearing kit if you don't have to. Alright, you can see got all our needles on there. Just to show you how good that trans gel is. I mean, some of it fell in, but I pulled that off as a unit. Look at how tight that is. So we need that spacer, so we'll just tip all these in. So next, the spacer goes on. Like I said, it's almost like they intended this to be a pressure fed unit. They got lube holes, but there's no pump. It's rather odd. So, spacer. Then we're going to dope this up, put the rest of our needles on, and then the last spacer. Alright. So our needles on there, get your last spacer. Slide her on. Head all doped up, nice and good. So, now, you're ready for this to go on, but you can't slide this on first. You got a snap ring here that locates the gear for the chain. you got the hub. So what you're gonna do, I'm probably not gonna be able to do this on camera because it's pretty tricky. It's definitely two hands. The hub gear, or the gear will go here. The hub that locks in four-wheel drive goes here. So pick this. Put her down. Put the hub down. And put some trans gel on them splines to help locate the hub. Then next, you'll get your chain, wrap it around this sprocket, the other sprocket, and you will guide it down as a unit. Because otherwise you can't flex the chain around the other sprocket if either one's on. It's got to go on as a nice, smooth unit. So I'll show you what that looks like when we're done doing that, because it takes two hands, and if you can't figure that out, then you probably shouldn't be into one of these. Alright, got it wrapped here. So I'm going to do is grab one hand here, grab the other end here. I'm going to pick it up as a unit and set her down. Boom, set down. Alright, now if you didn't use enough trans gel on them needles, you might have a needle that'll kick out, and when you're trying to slide it down, it'll go to $10 I don't know. Had that happen before. It's, as you can see, use this shit liberally. It's $10. Use it, sather up good. It'll hold them needles in place. It's a one and done deal. Makes your life much easier. So, as you can see, that snap ring's there to locate the gear. You get your hub down there. The fork's running that hub. So now you're to the next step. What you're going to do is you're going to take and you're going to put this snap ring on. So use a pair of these. You know, them style snap ring pliers. Any will work. Or you can be creative with screwdrivers and hurt yourself and other cool things. But get that snap ring on there. Alright. Just set your snap ring on there. Grab your pliers. You get in there. Yada yada. You get it. It's a two-hand job. Spread it, push it down, lock it. Snap rings in. So next, vest bearing. So you got the washer and the bearing. Your other washer will be in there. Make sure that's there, or shit's not gonna work. Well, it'll work, but it's gonna eat some stuff up. You'll love it. Just love it. So next step, that's on there. Good. You can take and throw your spring on here quick, and then we'll dope up this real good, and put our needles in. Like I said, it's almost like they thought they're going to pressure feed this. You can see they have an oil port there, but they didn't. I just don't understand it. But transgel this up, stack your big needles all around here. Alright, you can see big needles all on there. Make sure your O-ring's there. Then grab your shaft here. Set it on. Like I said, I still have to clean up mine, so I'm going to do that quick because there's a little bit of rust there from, this Hummer's a 92 and it's freaking 2020, so she's got a lot of sitting time for only 20,000 miles, so I'm going to polish that up and then we'll set her right on. Alright, cleaned our rust up. Just a little emery paper. And good. You'll see she's sitting here. I hate it. I hate how they run this steel gear on this aluminum. Obviously it doesn't hurt it, but it just feels like there should be a thrust washer. And in case you're doubting me that there's not a thrust washer there, I'll show you an exploded view. Alright, here's a good exploded view out of any Hummer manual. So you got our needles and our shaft. There's that Speedo type like plastic gear. That's a bushing. Then you got the actual Speedo. And then a snap ring, a bearing, snap ring, boom. Then the bearing for the tail housing. There's no thrust washer behind that gear, between that case. Seems really odd to me. I would have put one, especially since when you look here, obviously they show snap ring, thrust washer, bearing, thrust washer. Like, why? They think that it doesn't need one there. Obviously they know better than I do because they're engineers, but just odd. So no thrust washer behind that gear. You just have that white or whatever color it is for you Speedo gear that's slid up on them splines is a bushing, and you have your actual Speedo gear. You see then, so you get your race and your bearings. So yeah, real odd. Really, really odd. But so we're ready to set that on after. Put this on. Takes a little bit to snap down. So you look, you'll see this groove is on the lower side. It's not quite center. Groove there. Sometimes I get ahead of myself with the camera here. Makes you overthink things. So there we go. So now we literally are ready. Clean the living piss out of this. Scrape it up. Clean that. Make sure you trans-gel that race in so it don't fall out when you flip her. Make sure you got your spring on. Make sure this is this direction. Clean her all up. Put her on. After you put a nice thin bead, you can use ultra black, but I like ultra gray. But thin bead. Just to cover. You don't want it to ooze in there. Set this case on, yada yada. And then we'll torque her up. Alright, so brake clean this up. I mean, take your brake clean, sather up a rag, wipe her down, wipe that down, nice and clean. Obviously, no more Permatex left. You can use ultra gray, black, blah blah blah, whatever you want, really. I use gray, it seems to work good. Black works alright. Put a nice thin bead, and then take your finger and kind of level her out. Just nice and smooth. It does not take much. You just go around, and then we'll set that half on it. Alright, got reasonably thin bead. You said you don't want to be too thick. Just light thin bead, because these are reasonably decent machine surfaces. And we'll take that, put her down. Alright, flipped her over, set her on. See, she isn't cinched up yet. Just sitting on the dowels. Alright, as you can see, the ultra gray, you're on all your bolts down, finger snug, just until it just starts to ooze out. He said I probably used a little too much, so that just the actual fact that that's oozing out that much with the finger snug, too much is not good. But you run it just to there, wait an hour, torque her up. Alright, so we already said our bolts are torqued down. Next, you want to make sure this is all cleaned up, get all the old Permatex off. So I got a little bit more scrape off there. I'll get that scraped off quick. And then clean this up too. You'll have a little bit that gets down in there. Get that all scraped out. Take a rag, brake clean it, wipe her down. And then have that ready. And another thing that you want to check out is your yoke. Now you can see right in here is where the seal actually rides. You can kind of see a burnt mark. Maybe, yeah, you can kind of see it there. You want to take and emery that up smooth because it'll tear your seal up. Yeah, you can see that kind of line. That's where the seal itself's riding. So we'll want to clean that up. Probably throw a new seal in on there. Alright, cleaned it up with some emery. You can see them two little ridges there after we cleaned it up. I mean, it's pretty smooth. But them there are the little dust seals on this seal. I can't quite see it, but there's a lip and a lip. And those are your seals to keep the dust out. It's not to keep the fluid in. But as you can see, they eat in a little bit and they get dirty. So you want to clean that up. Because otherwise, if you got that rust in there, it'll tear these seals up even more. I'm probably going to replace this seal. It's not bad. It wasn't leaking, but I have one. And it's the easiest one to throw in. Alright, as you can see, I already got the seal out. But how you get them out, take a chisel, get them under the lip, take your hammer, hit here, pops them right out. Real nice and easy. This one had a little bit of black Permatex around it. I'll probably put a sit and smear Ultra Gray. Make your new seal. As you can see, it's got the double dust grooves. Those are them two lines I was showing you on the yoke. And then there's your actual seal for to keep the oil back. So what I'm going to do is put a thin smear on, and I'll drive her down on with a seal driver, nice and easy. Alright, get a thin smear just on the edge there. Take your seal driver, put it on. You just drive it down, nice and easy. I'll take two hands to do this, so I'll drive it down real quick. Alright, seals drove down. Now you don't have to. Just a little extra bit of precaution. I always just take just a thin kind of leftover smear of Permatex around the OD of that seal to fill in the V groove there. Not needed. I mean, there is that green sealer already on there. So, don't need to do it. You don't go hog wild. As you can see, I just put thin smear in there. So, now we're ready to put our speedometer gear on. It's on like such. And your shims, they'll go on. Whatever, how many ever you had. And then next, we're going to take that, put it on after we'll put a thin smear of Permatex there. Alright, you can see we got our thin smear of Permatex. I'm just gonna alright, let's start putting our bolts in. Cinch her up. Alright, got her all cinched up. You can see as you put a mark on them, make sure that you got your speedo cable coming out in the right direction. This one's pretty self-explanatory because it's got the breather port on the tail section, which has to be all the way up, but good rule of thumb for when you're doing them. Now, we'll put our yoke in. I like to put a little bit of oil, shoot a little bit of oil down on that bearing because you got it all cleaned out. When you fill the transfer case, it's kind of like an angle like this, and there's your fill plug. And it doesn't quite get oil up to that bearing all the time. You don't want it to be dry, especially since you just washed everything out, or you should have. So you just shoot a little bit of ATF down in there, so that bearing's got some pre-lube. Alright, next take your yoke, put a little bit of oil around that so you don't tear your new seal up. Alright, then we're going to put our little gasket down in there. We got a new one over here. Alright, here's our brand new one. You see it's a little thicker, it hasn't been crushed yet. Just gotta kind of fish them down in there. Make sure it's seated. And put on your nut. I said torque it tight, and then boom, you're done. Ready to put it back in the truck. Hope that helped anybody.